Don't.
Good evening, hello, and welcome to the sixth GlenAllachie live isolation tasting. My name is David Keir, and tonight I'll be talking with GlenAllachie Master Blender Billy Walker. We'll be talking about his career in general, of course, the three wood finishes we're going to be trying tonight, GlenAllachie as well, of course. Before we get started, though, it's worth reflecting on what we've achieved at GlenAllachie. We've owned the distillery for not even 3 years. It's less than 2 years since we launched our core range. It's not even a year, just over a year since our first wood finish release. A year since our visitor centre opened. And of course, we should have been celebrating that birthday up at the Spirit of Speyside Festival. In fact, we should have been in recovery mode. The Spirit of Speyside Festival is always rather hectic. What else have we done at GlenAllachie? We've increased the number of colleagues from 7 to 22. We've shipped to over 50 countries. We've won World's Best Blended Malt for McNair's Lumbrick, 21-year-old. We've won Distillery of the Year. Billy has won Master Blend of the Year for both Scotland and, of course, the global one. And perhaps also we've cut our own hair around 17 times, and both Billy and myself are sporting brand new homemade hair tonight. So, like all our isolation tastings, this will be informal. We'll go where the conversation will take us. Billy will take us through the three wood finishes. But if you don't have those to hand, then perhaps just grab a dram of GlenAllachie, any GlenAllachie, and join us. Okay. So I think on that note, it's time for me to bring in Billy Walker. Billy, good evening.
Hi, David. How are you?
Very well, Billy. Thank you very much. Billy, you're famous, or perhaps infamous, for your early starts and leaving the house at 4:30 or 5 a.m. So you're up at the distillery the same time as a production team. How have you found lockdown? How have you managed to cope?
Well, as you can see, David, I don't have much hair left, so probably pulling my hair out kind of describes the experience. I do have to say I am unbelievably frustrated just now. It's not getting to the distillery for 2 or 3 weeks means that we have to gather a lot of samples and have them shipped down, and it's a bit more difficult. But you know what? It is what it is. We have to obey the rules, and hopefully, just hopefully, there is some kind of sign that maybe a degree of normality will be allowed and we will be able to re-engage with the real world.
Yeah, I think that's all we can do, Billy, is stay safe, follow the guidance, but hopefully perhaps we're seeing some light at the end of the tunnel. So tonight, Billy, we're going to be tasting 3 of the wood finishes from our recent launch. We've got an 11-year-old muscatel, an 11-year-old port pipe finish, and a 9-year-old rye. What order should we be tasting these through tonight, and why?
Well, the order that I'm proposing to do, David, so I suppose everybody's going to follow, is we'll start with the muscatel, then we'll move on to the port wood finish, and then we will do the rye wood. And the reasoning behind that is that in terms of the palate, the muscatel is probably the silkiest, and maybe, I'm not saying the least challenging, but the easiest. The port wood moves up a kind of dimension in terms of robustness, and then you move into the rye wood, which is, frankly, at the other end of the spectrum, where you're picking up a lot of spices, ginger, cinnamon, nutmeg. So it's a different tasting experience, and I think probably this time in the evening, and hopefully most people have not consumed anything that's too challenging in terms of flavour. I think it's the right direction to go in.
Okay, thanks for that, Billy. Just before we move on, I see some familiar names. Some are joining us, so thanks everybody, the regulars, and everyone else that's taken time to join us. Thank you very much for that. Billy, before we move on and then try the muscatel, when you're putting together a selection of casks for a wood finish release, such as the 11-year-old muscatel, what are the kind of factors that will influence the casks that you'll pick and they'll go towards the final vatting?
I think, first of all, David, is to define what casks you want to buy initially to start the process of flavour extension. But once we have started re-racking and the whiskey is now in its new home, we will follow the development of the casks, certainly on a monthly basis, just to see how they're developing. We kind of, from experience, know how long it might take for the casks to reach their sweet point, and they vary enormously. For example, the rye woods will be at the point of the sweet point significantly before a red wine, say, for example. We would expect the port to take 18 months to 2 years. And the muscatel is interesting, and more about that later. It's an interesting wine. It delivers some very interesting fruity notes, apricots and peaches. But again, we would follow the development on a monthly basis, and maybe even more frequently, to make sure, A, that we don't cross the line, and B, that we're able to capture the liquid at the sweet point.
Billy, that's a very interesting point. So basically, you're saying that the wood type and the wherever wine or spirit has previously been in that cask is going to have an impact on that cask development before we get to it. So that's very interesting. There's a quick comment in there from Russell. We said we'd talk about your career, Billy. Russell's got a great question. Billy, have you always wanted to own a distillery? When you were a small boy growing up, what were your life's ambitions? Did you think that you would own a distillery many years down the line?
Listen, Russell, as I frequently tell people, I'm a wee boy from the housing scheme called Bellsmire in Dumbarton. My first aspiration in life was to get some kind of qualification at school. And then moved on a bit to get some kind of qualification at university. But I was lucky in the sense that I lived in a whiskey town, and it was magnetic. And I have to say, when I joined Ballantyne's, little did I ever believe that an opportunity to own a distillery or distilleries would ever materialise. So the journey's been interesting, and there have been critical points along the way, and indeed critical people who have influenced the direction of my travel along the way. So in answer, no, it never ever crossed my mind, but what a pleasure.
Very lucky, Billy, very lucky. Okay, coming back to the wood finishes, we've got these ones. It's an unusual assortment of ages, Billy. Traditionally, whiskies tend to maybe be 10, 12, 15. Our previous release was an 8-year-old rye. This is a 9-year-old rye. We've got 11-year-old. Is there any particular reason that these three which you've recently selected for bottling, the 11-year-old muscatel, 11-year-old port, and 9-year-old rye, is the age just coincidental, or is there any rationale behind that?
No, the age isn't necessarily coincidental, David. There is some rationale. I won't say there's a scientific rationale. It really is about understanding the building blocks of the whiskey substrate coming from its first casks. The ones you're going to taste tonight, both the muscatel and the port, spent almost all of their previous life maturing in fresh American oak barrels, whereas of course the rye cask would have been in American rye whiskey. So that tells us one or two things. But the casks that have gone into the rye vatting are a mix of fresh American barrels, refill butts, and refill hogsheads, and it makes for a much more interesting combination of, and that's why they were used in the rye, because the rye is going to deliver this very rich heather, honey, butterscotch, vanilla anyway, and so we're offsetting that by using some casks that perhaps have a different kind of life in terms of what they're delivering during the next process.
So each different cask adds layers complexity and different depth of flavour.
Totally.
Billy, we've got another good question, which the question coming in from Duncan. Have you ever came across a cask type or finish that's not worked with the GlenAllachie spirit? And I think, given your years in the industry, we'll roll that across to any of your previous companies or distilleries. Have you ever came across a particular cask type or anything that is a challenge to work with?
Look, the one type of wine cask that presented a real challenge for me during my period with Ben Rea was Tokai casks.
That's the one I was thinking of, Billy, but I didn't want to.
I do have to say, on reflection, I don't think it had anything to do with the quality of the cask. I think it probably was more to do with how we had husbanded the cask in advance of putting the whiskey into the cask. But as it turned out, we had a very interesting acetone flavour in one of the casks. So it kind of has prejudiced me against Tokai casks going forward, which is a shame, because I actually have tasted some of our peers and competitors' casks who have had additional maturity in Tokai, and they've been very good.
Billy, the Tokai wine itself is absolutely fantastic, but it does seem to be a challenge. It seems to hit the spot and work or not. So it's interesting. Gosh, Billy, we've got loads of questions. Here's a particularly good one from Catherine. And it's particularly pertinent, given that at the moment we all have to keep ourselves fit and look after ourselves, given that we're in lockdown. How does a master blender keep his nose fit and in condition?
Well, thankfully, the actual warehousing side of the distillery continues to operate. We only have 3-4 people on the site at the moment. The distillery is closed, and of course the visitor centre is closed. But we are able to operate the warehousing side within the government guidelines. So we are able to sample a lot of the whiskies that we are looking forward to in the future, and we have these delivered down on a every other week basis. So
even though we're operating under lockdown circumstances, the development of GlenAllachie releases and cask evaluation pretty much continues. Unapace.
It's a bit more complicated. You would prefer to be in the warehouse, interfacing much more intimately with the cask. But things are the way they are. But it hasn't stopped us, and we are getting access to the samples we're looking for.
Okay, Billy, I think it's maybe time that we tried a dram. We didn't keep everybody waiting and getting thirsty. So I think some of you perhaps have been able to access and purchase some of the wood finishes, either through the little miniature packs, which I do know have been available, or even buying a bottle from the retailers. We released this wood finish range just at the end, just as lockdown was happening. So it was an interesting time and a challenging time, and there are far greater concerns out there in the world just now than the launch of our wood finish range. But it's been out and about, been available from retailers, from some of our export markets. So hopefully some of you have had a chance to get some of this whiskey, and if not, then just hopefully grab any kind of muscatel, any GlenAllachie dram and join us. So Billy, I think the first one you said you wanted us to start with was the muscatel.
Muscatel.
The 11-year-old.
The one, David.
So talk us through it, Billy. Talk us through your notes, what you were looking for when you put this together, when you knew that this was the one that we were going to bottle, and your notes on the nose and palate, etc.
I mean, can I just say, David, that first of all, muscatel is a very interesting. It's a very interesting cask. It's a very interesting wine, and we know the history. They're difficult to get, incidentally, in muscatel casks. We know the history of the casks. They have been seasoned for 18 months over two periods. They are European oak, and they were, prior to filling with wine, they were toasted in medium toast. So casks were in good condition. We sourced them from a winery that we engage with. They enter the casks and bung them immediately. make sure there's no sulfur addition, and they're immediately transported to Scotland. So where are we with this particular muscatel? You mentioned the age, David. In my case, I'm not sure the age is all that material. We chose it because we thought it was in prime condition. It had delivered for us. I think it's been in these casks for about 18 months. As I mentioned earlier, initially their first period of maturation was in fresh American barrels. So, you know, the building blocks, when we are going to taste it, folks, but I'm just explaining some of the art behind this. We know that the building blocks in Allachie, having been in fresh American barrels, you're going to get heather honey, you're going to get butterscotch, vanilla pods, orange peel, little hints of dark chocolate and mocha. What did I expect that the muscatel cask would deliver here? And from my experience, my expectation would be peaches, apricots, and this elusive grape must taste and note. So let's have a look.
Billy, it's always interesting to get that background. I have to be honest and say I'm more of I know what I like, I know what I don't like, but we certainly do get a huge amount of interest in the casks and toasting and the charring, what they were used for before, how long. So thanks very much for supplying that background information.
So I'm actually nosing at full strength. Of course, other people may choose to add some water to it, and I probably will later. But since I'm nosing before I'm drinking, I definitely am not going to add water to it at the moment. But on the nose, first of all, delicate. There is absolutely no hint of aggressive spirit. And as I said, all the levels of building blocks are there, the heather honey, butterscotch, vanilla. You'll definitely pick up some orange zest, but importantly, what is extending the flavour in this particular expression? I hope you're going to pick up the apricots, the peaches, and just a little hint of bitter grape must.
Getting a little bit of citrus there, Billy, as well.
That's your orange peel, David, and that certainly will be part of the experience from the fresh American.
And you say you're nosing these at full strength, so this is 48%, Billy.
48%. Gentle, non-aggressive, mild.
Is there any particular reason that you went for 48% rather than traditional GlenAllachie has been 46% or cask strength?
You know, in truth, David, if the whiskey allows, in my opinion, it's better to drink as high as you possibly can and bottle as high as you possibly can. There are other reasons, of course, that if you go too low, certainly as you go under 46, you have a real chance of either cold flock or warm flock developing, when cold flock in the cold, warm flock if it stays in bottle over an extended period of time. Once you're above 46 above 48, you have a sustainable stability of the product in terms of brightness and the non-appearance of cold or warm flock. The other thing, David, is that you have to balance it with the actual tax issues, so that you're not totally compromising the price. But you know, from my own experience, I like seeing higher strength. 48, 50, fine. But it does have an impact in terms of where you would price the share for various countries.
Billy, you mentioned flock there. Just quickly maybe clarify for someone that perhaps not so clear. That is basically when crystals form within the whiskey. It's not sediment as such, but it's more when crystals form within the actual whiskey itself. Is that right?
Yes. I mean, what happens, David, is that once you add water, at 60%, 55%, whatever, higher strength, this is chemical now, this is chemistry, the long chain fatty acids stay in solution. But once you add water, you change the solution characteristics of the liquid. And so they are less comfortable staying in solution. And over a period of time, if the strength continues to fall, they will actually start coming out of solution. But it is, I mean, all that's happening is that one of the flavor ingredients is precipitating. It's not offensive. It's not. It's nothing bad about it. It's just that the whiskey is becoming a little bit unstable.
Okay, well, thanks for the clarification, Billy. And
Can we actually taste this now?
Let's go, Billy. Let's go. We're talking too much here. I'm holding you back.
I mean, full on, and all the principal taste features that I expect, David, and we have noted are there. You're looking at the heather, honey, butterscotch, vanilla. Orange zest is there in spades.
A huge hit of fruit there, Billy. Just a huge mouthful of fruit coming through.
That's your peaches and your apricots, David. And it's a delight, and it's well balanced, front, middle, and back. It's a start, finish, and long experience, and beautiful colour.
I don't think I've tried that many muscatel woods before, Billy, so that was certainly an interesting experience. I think I was just taken aback by the sheer mouthful, as you say, the apricots, the peaches, etc. Okay, we've got a couple more questions coming through, Billy. Here's one from Philip. You recently won Master Blender of the Year, which is a tremendous recognition for yourself and for GlenAllachie. How do you go about creating a blended whiskey? What's the starting point? Do you start with what you have, or do you start with where you want to get to?
I think a complicated question. If you are at the infancy of the experience, then you design it. You design it from day one. And in many ways, we're doing both things at GlenAllachie at the moment. We've inherited a style of GlenAllachie whiskey that we are working on, and we are realigning. And in parallel, we are producing. I've lost you, David. We're producing our own new fill, which has a significant number of twists in terms of where the distillery was when we inherited it. I mean, for example, we are now doing long fermentation to 160 hours, which in itself is a challenge. The benefits are, of course, we get significant flavour development. We get a benign wash going to the wash still, which gives us a much more relaxed distillation experience. So
it's good, but it wouldn't be a GlenAllachie live isolation tasting, Billy, if we didn't have a technical challenge. My lights seem to have popped out, but I'm sure they'll come back on in a second. Let me keep chatting, Billy, and I'm sure my lights will come back on.
Going back to, I mean, the real challenge, the real skills of the blender are not so much being the architect of the whole experience, but actually inheriting a collection of inventory that, first of all, you will evaluate, and then you will decide what goes where, what balances what. And some people might say this is science, and partly it is a science, but in many ways it's an art. And it's an art. It's a kind of feely, touchy thing. I mean, if we're talking about blended whiskey, my particular favourite grain whiskey was the Barton grain, and there was a reason for that. It was a filtered wort and gave you the cleanest, sweetest grain spirit you could ever imagine. And then you have to become familiar with the various malts that you can access too. Sometimes you have to make substitutions, but in your mind, it's like a Lego set. You know what pieces are missing and what should I be doing here. I suppose it's really just experience.
It's interesting, Billy. When I started many years ago, I used to think, blends sometimes get a little bit of a bad name, or they're perceived wrongly, in my opinion, as inferior malts. But some of the great blends out there, fantastic. Johnny Walker Black Label 12-year-old, just an everyday blend, but fantastic whiskey. There's so much flavour in blends and so much opportunity. So it's interesting to hear a little bit about what goes on in the background in putting these together. Okay, another great question, Billy, and this one goes back to one of your famous distilleries, which you've worked with over the years. Does GlenAllachie use the same sherry bodega as GlenDronach? And we all know GlenDronach is outstanding whiskey.
The answer is that we yes, we are supplied from the same tonneria. We also use one or two other tonneries, but no, we are comfortable with the supply coming from the same source.
Okay, Billy. Very good answer. So we're talking there about GlenDronach. Why GlenAllachie? Why did you buy GlenAllachie? What was the attraction for you for this unknown distillery sitting up there in the Speyside? Never really heard of, very unknown. What drew you to GlenAllachie?
You know, David, there's a question before that, and maybe two questions before that, and I will answer the question. But the reality is that, you know, single malt, as we know it, in terms of the boutique side of the industry, the boutique footprint, really only happened round about the time we bought BenRiach. And it's not because we bought BenRiach, it was coincidental with that time. I remind you, at the time when we bought BenRiach, there were 24 distilleries mothballed.
Wow.
And that was as a consequence of a downturn in the blended whiskey side of the business. So single malt whiskey, in the sense that I understand it and we understand it, David, really has only taken off since 2004, maybe 2006, 7 and 8. So the experiences we had with BenRiach and latterly with GlenDronach were the same type of experiences. Distilleries that were relatively unknown, that had historically been the supplier of malt whiskey to some very famous blends. GlenDronach was for a long time a stalwart in teachers, and BenRiach would have played a role in some of the Chivas blends. So we accessed distilleries at a time that were blank sheets. We were able to paint our own pictures, to do our own creative stuff, to understand the inventory, and just to design the plan and create the brands that we wanted to create. Why GlenAllachie? GlenAllachie, in many ways, was no different from BenRiach, GlenDronach, and to a lesser extent, Glenglassaugh. It was a distillery that I knew extremely well. It was probably a little bit too big for us. But nevertheless, I was very familiar with the quality of the spirit, very comfortable, and more importantly, David, it had been working a long time, but it had never really been truly exposed to the market. So we were doing what we think we enjoy doing. I'd like to say we're good at doing, but that's a conceit. But we were doing what we enjoy doing. We were taking a distillery that had virtually no exposure to the market, and more importantly, no exposure to multiple retailers. We were able to go in and examine the inventory, and we get some staggeringly good inventory from New Fill through to 1978. Fantastic. I mean, the opportunity to explore, become intimate with it, and then bring categories to the market, expressions to the market, the cask strength, the 12-year-old, the 15, the 18, the 25. We're going to have a 21-year-old, a 30-year-old. It's brilliant. You know, it's like Aladdin's cave.
We're fantastically lucky to have, you're absolutely right, the distillery with the depth of stock and the age of stock. And it certainly has given you the opportunity to explore all these different ages and bring your own expertise to that, because you have the casks there to work with. So we're certainly in a hugely fortunate position.
I have one ambition, David, and that is that I will still be alive when our 12-year-old New Fill comes to the market.
Oh, I'm sure you will, Billy. I'm sure you will. And I'm very hopeful you are. The Queen is still going strong at 93-year-old, I believe. So there's lots. And David Attenborough, I read recently, was going to still be going with the BBC when he was 100. So we'll not dwell on your age, but let's just say there's plenty of mileage in you yet. Quickly, just before we go on to the next whiskey, there's a great question which follows on, I think, from what we've just been chatting about there. It's a question from Laura. What's the hardest part of making whiskey? And what's your favourite part of making whiskey?
Oh, what a difficult question. I'm not sure that I would classify any of the process of making whiskey difficult. But you've got to be disciplined for sure. You've got to be disciplined. There are places you can make mistakes, but if you define your target and you know what you're looking for, then by and large there are not too many difficulties. The best part of the job is unquestionably interfacing with the whiskey, interfacing with the casks, understanding how they behave. What is the DNA of these casks? And, the funny thing in all of this is, I could talk endlessly, but you could have two identical casks, sitting in the same microclimate and warehouse, and they behave totally differently. And that's the wonder and the beauty of this industry. And that's why it's so important that you become intimate and you interface with the casks and the whiskey on a regular basis, as to see how they're developing.
Okay, great.
I'm not sure that answered the question, but hope.
Billy, as I said at the beginning, it's an informal chat and we're just going to go where we go. I think I'm just going to add quickly something. People, Billy, I think I've worked in a few other industries before I came to whiskey, and I think the people in the whiskey industry, there's great camaraderie between distilleries and our colleagues. It seems to attract fun people. So it's certainly, for myself, I think people are a great part of the whiskey as well.
I think it allows people to have fun, David. And I also have to say that the kind of relationships between the companies is fantastic. Big companies are wonderful to work with. The Diageos and the Pernods of this world, they're fantastic people to deal with.
Absolutely, Billy. Absolutely agree with that 100%. Time's running on, Billy, so perhaps we should move on to the second whiskey that you thought we should look at tonight. The port pipe finish, 11-year-old again, 48% again. Hopefully you guys can see that on the screen. I'm not sure you can quite get the colour there coming through. What port is in this one, Billy? What style of port did we work with for this one?
Look, this is a ruby port, and it's from a very famous port house. I'm sorry, I can't name it. The wood is the wood of the pipe is European oak. So it's a very nice yin yang. The wood is a very nice yin yang to the fresh American barrels, which the whiskey was previously resting in. What is my expectation from the port cask? As I said, we know the DNA of the first casks the whiskey was matured in. So we know there's going to be heather honey, there's going to be vanilla, butterscotch, there's going to be orange zest. So what am I expecting the port to deliver? I'm expecting the port to deliver plums, damsons, cherries, maybe even hints of strawberries, hints of cocoa, dark chocolate, and mocha. And, I have tasted this and I'm very comfortable with this particular bottling. I think this will be, when you're tasting, and I know it's late in the evening to be tasting, but I'm pretty sure that your palate will be identifying quite a lot of these characteristics.
And Ruby Port is one of the more vibrant port styles, Billy. So does it work well with, because GlenAllachie is I've heard you refer to it as quite a muscular, strong spirit. And with Ruby Port being one of the more vibrant styles, is that a good match and they tend to complement each other, bringing out the best? I
think, David, it's all about following the development of the whiskey in the new cask and getting the sweet point. Yes, GlenAllachie it's not a shy whiskey. And Portwood, although it's a big cask, Portwood delivers significant flavour development to the whiskey. So it's all about getting the sweet point, David, and following it. But Portwood, you'd expect 18 months, 2 years, and you could comfortably go longer. But it would deliver, it might move the direction and the bias of the flavour towards the plums, the damsons, not badly, and the cherries.
Just perhaps the cask influence would start, instead of the point of balance, we're maybe getting a little bit more wood influence overriding the...
I'm not saying you're overcooking it, David. There are woods that can overcook the whiskey. You just take it past a particular, and then it's on another journey to another flavour destination.
Okay. Should we try this one then, Billy?
Sure. Listen, that's why we're here.
Absolutely. Sludge.
So on the nose, you should be picking up the kind of conventional GlenAllachie notes, the butterscotch, the heather honey, orange zest, vanilla pods. Sorry, David.
Some blackberries coming through there, Billy, for me?
Blackberries. You should be blackberries, damsons, plums, cherries, kind of stone fruit, rich stone fruit, almost stewed stone fruit.
Mm-hmm.
And in the background, you might be picking up cocoa, dark chocolate mocha.
That chocolate, and we've heard you mention butterscotch as well, butterscotch, mocha, chocolate. That's almost a GlenAllachie trait, which you can always pick up to a certain extent. It tends to run through. It's almost like the GlenAllachie DNA, the GlenAllachie character. And I can certainly get it coming underlying on this one as well. Okay, Billy, we're talking woods. Is there any, let me think, let's see, what's your favourite cask type to work with? You've obviously made a bit of a name for yourself with sherry casks, but is there any wood types out there that you particularly, when you get the chance to source these casks and to work with these casks, you think, oh boy, we're in for something here?
Look, David, we are quite brave, and I don't mean that in a complimentary way. I just mean it in we do push the envelope a little bit with wood. I think our experience with Chinkabin was very interesting. I loved it. It was a particular genus of American oak. More in terms of flavour, more powerful, more spicy, more licoricey, more anisey, tighter pour. Difficult to work with, and absolutely you had to follow that on a monthly basis, maybe even in a shorter than monthly basis, because that can overcook. And I think we took the Chinkabin about 15 months. That's not to say it can't go longer. It will take it onto another journey then. Then you have to look at how you offset that against something else that you're producing, let's say another release. But I would love to do some work. I'd love to do some work with Mizunara, and we will. Later in the year, we will get some Mizunara cask. I would love to do some work with Scottish oak. The problem with Scottish oak are short trees, lots of knots and gnarls, and so they're very expensive, very hardwood. The sawmills hate them, the coopers hate them even more, and they're difficult to seal. But my understanding from many old people I spoke to in the past is that they delivered some wonderful flavours. So yeah, there are things we would still like to do, and I'm sure there's other things that will come up, David.
So there's a challenge for any sawmillers or timber merchants. If we can get some quality Scottish oak timber, then we'd be delighted to work with it. So Billy, that's you're talking there about species of oak. So it's not just necessarily a muscatel or port or PX or whatever. You're actually looking and working with different species of oak itself to see what kind of impact it's going to make on GlenAllachie spirit. Is that correct?
Yeah, and we know, David, from previous experience, we know that there is. First of all, you've got American oak, most American oak. Let's say Appalachian oak, which is pretty sweet. You know, these casks will have had a medium toast, medium char, so you're going to get some nice vanilla notes, some nice butterscotch notes, and the charring and a deep charring might give you the dark chocolate and the mocha notes. On the European oak, which is a tighter pour, it's much less sweet. It's much more tanniny in note, and that's where you are in terms of the spectrum. Spanish is probably somewhere in between. Love to look at. I think, as I mentioned to you earlier in the week, David, I'd love to also look at some Russian oak, Eastern Russian oak. at GlenAllachie we managed. Sorry, at GlenAllachie we managed to get some Russian Crimean wine oak from the Sandra winery, and they were fantastic. They were just amazing, and the thickness of the staves was unbelievable. But the delivery, the flavour delivery, was terrific. So there's a lot of exciting stuff out there that we will explore, and maybe we're small enough to be able to take time out and do these journeys of exploration.
Absolutely. Billy, just while you're talking there's so many people with so many great questions, so apologies if we don't get around them all, but here's a good one come in. Billy, we're going to go, we've been talking about casks and woods, we're going to go off in a different direction here. Great question from Michael. What is a highlight memory for you from your time in the whiskey industry and all those decades? Let me pick my words carefully. In all those decades you've been working in the whiskey industry, what is the real highlight that stands out for you?
There are many highlights, David. I have to say that one of the really, really exciting periods I had in the industry was when I was working at Inverhouse, who are an amazingly interesting company. They never stood still. They were always on the move. And they gave you fantastic opportunity. They were an American company, but they just did things. We had Glenflagler, we had Garn Heath Spirit. It was an exciting time, but I was young then. And
you still are young, Billy. I told you, we've got decades ahead of you.
Not adventurous. My experience at Burnstewart was interesting because we kind of rehabilitated Deanston and Tobermory, and they were fun, but it still was at a time, David, when malt distilleries were essentially feeding blended whiskey, essentially feeding Scottish Leader. And then, of course, we started the Ben Reef Company. I suppose I think probably the most enjoyable part of that journey was what we did with GlenAllachie. And here was a sleeping giant that had regrettably been silent for 6 years. And that's really what presented the opportunity to buy it, because it was a difficult proposition for a big company to manage a distillery that had a gap of 6 years in inventory. But it presented some great opportunities, David. It was a wonderful distillery, and it continues to be. And GlenAllachie will continue to be in the same model. And I should have said to you when we were talking about casks, I mean, the direction of travel for GlenAllachie and the house style will unquestionably be influenced by sherry casks, and a big influence by sherry casks. So there's been lots of great moments. Maybe the crowning one was what we did with what we were allowed to do with GlenAllachie, and that was about the team. And it's all about team, by the way. I'm answering the questions here, but this company is all about the team. The previous company is all about the team. There is no one individual can successfully make the company happen. It's the team. So we're on the next journey, David, and I suspect there'll be some great moments coming up.
Oh, of that, I'm absolutely sure. Billy, there's so many questions. We could stay and chat for so long. Time is running on, so I'm going to have to chase on to our last whiskey of the night, Billy. And this is an interesting one, I think. 9-year-old rye, which I think, to the best of my knowledge, is quite unusual. I don't think I've seen a rye finish out in the market before. So this is our second release of the rye. Previously, it was our last release was an 8-year-old in rye quarter casks. This is a 9-year-old, not in quarter casks, again in 48%. So Billy, maybe you can talk us through this one.
Well, you can see the beautiful golden colour. Let me pour it first of all, David. But as I alluded to earlier, the makeup of the vatting going into the ryewood casks is quite different from the muscatel and the port. It's essentially about 50% fresh American, 50% refill butts, and 50% refill hogsheads. So the base building blocks are different, because we know that the rye is also going to bring significant heather, honey, butterscotch, vanilla notes, along with the spicy notes. We're going to get ginger, we're going to get cinnamon, we're going to get hints of cloves, and you're definitely going to get orange zest tang. So this is a different experience, David, and it may not be to everybody's taste, but it is a well-balanced. It's a well-balanced product. And interestingly, the supplier of these casks is also a boutique operator, and our arrangement with them is that as soon as they dump the casks are bunged and immediately dispatched to us, so that by the time we get them extremely fresh, and we can put our whiskey into them virtually immediately. It's also important to note that they do not wash these casks. They don't rinse the casks with water prior to shipping, which leaves the casks in a pretty healthy state, very fresh when they arrive. So yeah, look, personally, I think this is a very interesting adventure, this Ryewood. It's not without. I mean, there's quite a lot of people are copying us now with rye and chinkapin, and maybe that's a compliment. Who knows?
I think that's the old saying, isn't it? Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. The rye casks for me, Billy, really do stand out. You touched on it there. I think perhaps there is an element of love it or hate it with the rye. But for me, it's the one I'm drinking just now. It's my go-to dram at the moment. I think the depth of flavour, the spice, the balance, etc., is all outstanding. Anyway, should we try this one?
Sure. I should say, David, it's interesting. The cask, the original casks that the Ryewood went into, were air dried for 36 months, which gives them a very, very interesting platform for the rye whiskey to work on.
Well, it's interesting with sourcing direct from small boutique distilleries. We know about that provenance and the quality of the wood that you're working with. Billy, I could sip this all night. Absolutely, for me, it's a standout. Though the muscatel, I think I might just need to revisit that as well.
But you can see in this one, David, that the spices are interesting. The ginger, the cinnamon, the nutmeg, the cloves, it's all in there. And it makes for an interesting combination.
Absolutely, definitely getting the spice, cinnamon coming through on that one. Oh, Billy, loads and loads and loads and loads of questions. Here's one from Dan, Washington, who I had the pleasure of spending some time with. An interesting question, Billy. We do long fermentations at the distillery. And Dan's question is, what is meant when you talk about, in some of your previous interviews and chats, you've mentioned, what is meant by a benign wash when you talk about the benefit of the long fermentation?
Dan, I don't know if you've been in the industry or if you've ever been part of a distilling team, but for example, if you take a fermenter at, say, 48, 52-hour period, it's still fermenting. And when you take that to the wash still, it's still fermenting, it's still alive, and it's actually much more difficult to control the distillation when there is still activity happening in the wash. With long fermentation, it's very settled, calm. The yeast is settled to the bottom. The solids management is easy. You bring it to the wash still, and it's a very benign, peaceful distillation process.
Okay, Billy. Sorry, I'm just trying to read questions and keep up here as well. Someone's asking, when are we going to get a cask strength rye release? Another question, why isn't Koval mentioned anymore on the label? The 8-year-old that we previously released was rye Koval casks. This distillery is not Koval, and they've asked us to respect that and not to use the name. Billy, we're getting towards the end of our of our time here. Let me just see if I can find a couple more questions here. What is the best cask to mature in your opinion, Billy? Well, I think we've mentioned that. What percentage of different cask types do we actually have in stock, and which amounts? That's a very detailed question. But Billy, I think perhaps you touched on that one by saying we were going to move, or you're going to take GlenAllachie in the direction of sherry. But there's, port, bourbon, Madeira. I think it's fair to say we've got a huge selection of casks laid down there at the distillery. Okay. Here's a question from Ross. Ross loves a peated port expression. Any chances that in the years to come, GlenAllachie will venture towards a peated port?
Yeah, well, listen, Ross, we've had a couple of peated campaigns. We started producing peated GlenAllachie in 2018. We did a campaign in 2019, and when we restart the distillery, we will move immediately on to a peated campaign. And there's some very interesting twists in these campaigns. We have taken some fractionated cuts, very short fractionated cuts with very intense phenolic presence, which we have been maturing in virgin oak casks for the moment. And I have to say, they're to die for. They're 2 and a bit years, and they're amazing. But when the peated GlenAllachie, and we still have to determine a name for that, when it has reached the point at which we believe we could bring it to market, unquestionably we will do a port peated finish and a number of others.
I've tried some of the peated GlenAllachie new making spirit, and I must admit, Billy, it's absolutely fantastic. So I personally am looking forward to seeing how that one develops over time. Okay, let me see. Dan saying thank you for answering his question. So Billy, we've got 5 more minutes to kill here before we're coming down, and of course we need to remember and clap for the NHS and the carers, etc. So Billy, what else can we look forward to come from GlenAllachie in the years ahead, and even in the months ahead, short term and longer term? What can we look forward to see?
I think, David, we've already mentioned that we want to bring a 21-year-old and a 50-year-old to the market. It's also worth mentioning that we have some interesting 1978 casks that continue to be very relaxed in the warehouses. So at some point we'll do something with them. We're excited about the possibility of bringing the White Heather brand back to life, blended Scotch whisky. It'll be launched as a 21-year-old. We have no intention of competing with the giants of the industry, but we will bring a product to the market that will be staggeringly good. The quality will be beyond good. And hopefully that will happen sometime this year, if not the early part of next year. We're also excited about some work we're doing with rum, and I'm hopeful that the current health situation allows us to come out of this, and that we can do some kind of creative activity around about the rum as well. So yeah, there's a lot of things happening, David, and we don't, as you well know, David, we don't stand still. And I think some of the things that we're bringing to the market will certainly excite our general followers. The White Heather will be terrific, I can tell you.
So we've got more to come from GlenAllachie, more woods, more oak species, peated GlenAllachie, White Heather, McNair's rum. So you've got David, a lot of magic.
You mentioned something there about the fine wood series, and that really is going to be a really interesting experience, where we're going to have some Appalachian oak, we're going to have some chinkapin, we're going to have some French oak, and we're going to have Spanish oak, all of which will have a particular terroir, not just French and Spanish, but a particular local terroir that we will evolve, and we will tell the story around about. And these will be, each of these will be significantly different in terms of both flavour and organoleptic characteristics.
I think that's certainly one that's going to excite a lot of people, Billy. The chinkapin cask, which we did as a handful at the distillery, created a huge amount of excitement. So I think people will be excited to see or to hear that we're working on a little bit more of different species coming down. Okay, Billy. Well, thanks again for your time. It's always a pleasure to talk with you and to talk whiskey.
I think, David, we should also thank the people who've tuned in, because it's a very trying time just now, and I'm sure you've got a lot of other priorities in your life. But we appreciate that you took time to join us tonight.
Absolutely. So I think on that note, Billy, thanks again. Thank you, everyone else, for joining in. I realise my light's gone out. I hope my Wi-Fi has held up. But of course, you're here to chat with Billy, so I hope that was enjoyable. Of course, we have the clap for the NHS and the carers and everyone else that's been out there working in what Billy says is challenging, difficult times. But there are people out there doing many difficult jobs, and we should always appreciate that. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you all again next week, where I think we might have something special coming up with some special exciting single casks. Thanks again, good night, and we will see you all again next week.
Good night, thank you.